From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to a new Sox Machine podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Monday, April 24th, 2023. Well, that trip to St. Petersburg, Florida went as expected, despite overcoming a 4-0 deficit in Game 1 and leading 7-5 in the ninth inning, or a Gavin Sheets pinch hit home run tying Game 2 in the 8th inning, and Lucas Giolito going 7 innings in Game 3, the Chicago White Sox were swept by the Tampa Bay Rays. This is a historically terrible start for the White Sox since the expansion era in 1961. Their 7-15 record is tied for the second worst start in franchise history, tying the 1986 White Sox team that was led by Hawk Harrelson as the GM, 1997, and the 2001 squads. Only the 2018 White Sox had a worse start to a season, 6-16, and that team finished with 100 losses. It's not bad luck why the White Sox are where they are now. We'll recap what happened in Tampa, contemplate if there's a fatal flaw with this roster, and preview the White Sox next series as they travel north to Toronto, which I'm sure that series will net a much different result. Joining me is the managing editor of SoxMachine.com. It's Jim Margulis. Jim, let's start off with some happy. We met up with our Sox Machine Veterans Committee members from Patreon.
Yes, I would like to think or say that I planned this for the White Sox starting 7-15 and having a road trip to the juggernaut Tampa Bay Rays, followed by a road trip to Toronto, and then another series with those juggernaut Tampa Bay Rays in order to talk about something else. But no, I guess we're just lucky. But yeah, we had an outing at Windy City Curling in Villa Park, a curling club I'd never been to. And you had proposed when we had the Veterans Committee of like, what kind of perks can we get the Veterans Committee? And you kind of tossed it off like, you can teach them curling. And I thought, it's not a bad idea. So just, when it came to starting out with an event, like having never been there, not knowing the people, wanted to start small. And so we just did a event with some of our Veterans Committee members and filled it out with the guys from the 108. And we curled for a couple hours and the whole learn to curl thing. How are you feeling after your first curling experience?
So what was weird? So I've been doing a lot of Peloton and I stretched before arriving to curl. So my hip flexors were fine. And I woke up the next day, I was good. That was the part of the body that I was worried because of that lunge that when you're sliding down the ice. And I was worried about my quads. I was worried about my calves. Those are fine. The top of my feet, like the top of my toes and the top of my feet are sore. And I've never been sore in this part of the body before. I'm not sure how you avoid that type of soreness, but they were not used to my foot folding flat while sliding on the ice.
Yeah, there's that, and there's also like the tension of just keeping your body stable when you're sliding out. And I think there's just more tension than usual. But yeah, I mean, when I'm coming off an off season and doing it for the first time, feet, ankles, like kind of the plantar gets sore, especially if you stand on your slider and you slide down the ice, just bracing yourself with the foot tension happens. But yeah, hips, the quads. I would say like when you're sweeping for 8 ends, that's when the lats come into play, and triceps and such, shoulders. Those will work out. We only did 3 ends and kind of switch positions to where like you were skipping, so you didn't have to sweep, and then you got involved. But yeah, when you're playing 8 ends, other body parts will get involved to where like you wake up after your first day of curling after being off for a while and you think like, am I getting sick? And you realize like, oh no, it's just, what did I do last night? Yeah, I curled. And then it all makes sense.
Yeah, I have to say my first curling experience, it was a blast. That curling rink is a lot longer than I was expecting. Like that was my first impression was, wow, that is really far away.
Yeah, it's, because it's hard to capture on TV.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same way you mentioned like 40-yard field goal. And it's kind of like how 40-yard field goals don't look that long anymore. And then you actually try to walk it off and like, oh yeah,
That
takes effort. But no, everybody looked, you could see the progress over the course of 3 ends. Like, I was looking at the video, sharing video, sending it your way, and like your slides looked really good. Like you were under control. You're sliding out for longer and longer. So, I mean, that's a lot of the battle is just like feeling like, you're going to fall over and bailing on it and kind of throwing it too early. And you could see the progress, like you and the 108ers and Pinols, and Pinols is really nervous about it, or just like he likes getting things right. And so when he can't get it right away, you can see him being like, why am I not getting this? And then, but he was, it was starting to fall into place. Dan was doing great. Like, a lot of good shots. The Sox Machine team played the 108, and the Sox Machine team came away victorious, which was a victory for the 108 because the winners by the first round after the game. That's a curling tradition. So of course they were all for that. But yeah, after the game, nice game room area. Got a couple pizzas. Had a lot of Labatt's to capture the spirit of curling, and despite what game unfolded afterwards. It was a good time, and I'm looking forward to doing it again and doing it a bit bigger next time. Now we know how much room there is, and how accommodating they are. We can probably get a few sheets going.
Yeah, and big shout out to Ron and Pete and Dan for joining us as part of our Veterans Committee, and of course Pinos was there, and our friends from the 108, Beef Loaf, Chirizi, My Sox Summer. Thank you for join us as well. But big shout out to our VC members, as they have been wonderful. And for those that don't know about the Veterans Committee, this is our highest tier on Patreon, and they kind of serve as our de facto board of directors, our advisory council. There are things that we share with them behind the scenes of how Sox Machine ticks. Some of it is financial information. Some of it is our future plans. Some of it's current plans as well. And we get their feedback from them. And we meet with them bi-monthly. And with their support, it really helps us move forward with what we want to do with Sox Machine, especially in the next couple of years. If you are interested in being part of the Veterans Committee, you can apply to be one on patreon.com/Sox Machine. If you really enjoy work and you really want to help out as far as behind the scenes, moving the Sox Machine forward, we can't accept everyone, even though it'd be wonderful to have all this money being invested at the Sox Machine. We are being selective in who joins because we do have a group chat also involved, so they constantly text back and forth things that we know that we share with them, or even texting during the game, which is a lot of fun. So they have direct access to us. So we want to vet everyone that's interested to join the Veterans Committee. We do have some spots available. So if you're interested in applying, you can go to patreon.com/Sox Machine. So when we have these things in the future for the VC members, you can get involved.
Yep. And, it might be a case too with, seeing how large the facility is that, we can do curling for Patreon, but, VC would get first, crack at it, or, help set the dates, and then things may fall in, as it happens, as we, go into this, whatever is going to be the rest of the season and what happens afterwards. We might be talking a lot of curling just to, get through this. This might be more of a curling blog that talks about the White Sox occasionally than, what's going on right now. But yeah, it was a nice, it was a nice diversion. And, I'm always happy to share, my second favorite sport and kind of share, what I love about it. And, I think between this and then the meetup in Cincinnati, it's nice to know that we have each other. Like, no matter what, like, no matter how the White Sox do, no matter how much the White Sox disappoint us, like the fun, why do we do this? Why do we keep watching the games? Part of it's just, because we like the people we watch the games with and talk about it with. And we know what's going wrong. I likened it a while back to like people who work on Fords or Chevys or a certain car brand, and that might frustrate them at times. They might say like, yeah, Fords are a piece of crap. I know why they're a piece of crap. And that's kind of how I feel about the White Sox sometimes, is like, oh, it's the, the catalytic converter always goes in these things. Or, the head gasket never lasts. Like, that's what it kind of feels like when you're talking about the White Sox. And we didn't, when you know them inside and out and the fans know them inside out, it's like it's a shared language of disappointment and coping.
Misery loves company. And I do have to say, when it comes to White Sox fan community, we are good company. So look forward to seeing everyone in Cincinnati soon. I think we're within a couple weeks now of being out there for that next road trip for the Chicago White Sox after they visit Toronto. We'll talk about that series later on, but a great transition, Jim, of knowing what is wrong with the Chicago White Sox. So let's talk about the White Sox. We delayed long enough. The White Sox getting swept in Tampa Bay. Joining Bernstein and Holmes before this series played out, and just talking to Dan and Lawrence, we had a conversation because I didn't know exactly how to answer the question of, will the White Sox win a game in Tampa Bay? And the only way that I could think of the White Sox winning a game in Tampa Bay is, one, limiting the home runs from the Rays because they've been fantastic, especially in the power department. And two, finding a way to capitalize against the Rays bullpen and score runs late. With the exception, game one was a bullpen game, so I would say games 1 and 2, the White Sox did a good job against the relievers from Tampa Bay. They did a poor job limiting the home runs. The Rays now have a major league record, 22 straight games to start a season hitting at least one home run. They are 13-0 now at home, which is incredible. And it just got me thinking, like, this is supposed to be a contention window for the White Sox. They're 7-15. That's bad in itself. But it is very clear that they are outclassed by the Tampa Bay Rays. And even if Tim Anderson and Yohan Mikado were around, I'm not entirely sure or sold on the idea that any of these game results would have been different. And just getting slapped in the face like that this weekend, knowing that you have to play them again next weekend, and that's a 4-game series at Guaranteed Rate Field, it just feels like, man, the Rays have an excellent opportunity to bury the White Sox. We haven't even gotten to May yet. And I just wonder, Jim, if there's something fatally wrong with this roster.
Well, when you look at this series, given that the losses were all close/respectable, and that sounds terrible when they're 7-15, but let's talk about the series in isolation. So I'm not saying like, they're doing okay.
Sure.
But let's just talk about the series like as 3 games. The games were within reach. They should have won the first game, Reynaldo Lopez blowing the save, but they were in position to win. Second game, extra innings, you're always in a position to win when you get to the 10th inning. They didn't execute in the top of the 10th, so the Rays had the hammer, to talk about curling terms. Like, they knew exactly what they had to do with their last shot, and they did it. So they had that going for them. And then third game was just like an ordinary loss, like an ordinary 4-1. Giolito pitched well, didn't pitch well enough to offset the offense. Like, they weren't, in 3 games, if you were just looking at these 3 games in and of themselves, they were not outclassed. The problem is, like Dylan Cease after the game on Saturday said, they're playing extremely well. They're good at not beating themselves. We've hung in there. They're definitely beatable. We've just got to do it. And, they lost a game where they had 6 walks in an inning. They had a run scored because they didn't cover first base. Like, they tried to beat themselves. The White Sox wouldn't let them. Then they faced Shane McClanahan and swing, 32 swings and misses, including like 28 through 5 innings, like 16 changeup swings, 14 whiffs. Like, the swing and miss rate was incredible. And then it's, Zach Eflin, who's okay, good command guy, and like a lot of swings and misses there, or just, Yanni Chirinos coming in and, shutting them down. When you look at it in that succession like that, and you think like, they're definitely beatable. We've just got to do it. They played beatable baseball, and the White Sox couldn't do it. So what does that say about the White Sox? That's kind of how I look at it is, when you bring the 7-15 record into it, now you bring in the rest of the context. It's like, yeah, they're not doing it. They're not doing it against anybody. And the Rays did not play killer baseball. Like, the game on Sunday, they played really good baseball. Their defense was outstanding, hit a couple of homers, pitched well, no walks. Like, that's a game where, yeah, you faced the really tough Rays team that we had heard about. They lost 4-1. But the other 2 games, they tried to beat themselves, or, the White Sox did put a dent in, like Gavin Sheets tomahawking that homer. That was a, that could have been a gut punch, and it wasn't, because they hit a grounder left side with the runner on second, doesn't advance them, and they have to get a hit, and they can't get a hit. That's just how we're looking at it. And so when you bring it all together, you do have big questions like, is the roster fatally flawed? And yeah, I mean, like when Yohan Moncada and Tim Anderson are out and, and Luis Robert is in one of his funks. Yeah. When Gavin Sheets has to play right field because Oscar Colas looks like a rookie. Yeah. This is a weak roster, especially when the injuries are injuries they dealt with last year and players who have been injured often and unavailable often. And the White Sox didn't really plan all that well for that.
So I guess to back up to my point, saying that I thought the White Sox were outclassed, I think you raised really good points there, Jim, that maybe I am wrong, that the White Sox were not necessarily outclassed because they did have an opportunity to win 2 games in this series, but they fumbled. Maybe, would you say the White Sox played better against the Rays than they did against the Phillies?
Yeah, I think, if this series were in mid-May and the White Sox were like, 30-27, or like, let's say they were 30-25, now they're 30-28, like you'd say, well, that's unfortunate. Hope they can dust themselves off. But in this case, it's dust. Dust is piling up and look kind of like a grave at this point.
So going back to the intro, this is the second worst start since the expansion era. The worst start being the 6-16 2018 White Sox team that would eventually lose 100 games. The only hope really is the 2001 White Sox squad that started 7-15. I think eventually they got to 14-29, a terrible start, and then they rallied back to
Jose Canseco arrived.
Yeah, Jose Canseco arrived, and they finished 83-79. That is the best finished record out of all the White Sox teams in franchise history that have started 7-15 since the expansion era, is 83-79. Now, a silver lining, the American League Central might be worse than we thought. The Minnesota Twins currently lead the Central with a 12-10 record. And they seem to be stubbing their toe for some reason against the Washington Nationals over the weekend. I don't think 83 wins is going to win the American League Central. But if you still want to hold out for hope, maybe the White Sox could still finish above 500. But things are going to have to drastically change. And back to the fatally flawed roster, it's a lot of the talking points that we have been mentioning over the years, Jim. Right now, the White Sox as a team have a 97 weighted runs created plus, according to Fangraphs. That's 20th in Major League Baseball. So they're 3% below league average, with 100 being league average. They're in the bottom 10 in that category. Walk rate, they're at 7%. That's 28th in Major League Baseball. Ground ball rate, they must hate my ideas because they are the worst in Major League Baseball at 47.6% of the balls they hit are grounders. The average exit velocity for the White Sox is 87.8 miles per hour. That is 25th in Major League Baseball. Pitching-wise, 11% walk rate from the pitchers. That is 28th in Major League Baseball. That is the worst in the American League. And they have allowed 29 home runs. They've only hit 23 home runs. So they have a -6 home run differential. And we've talked about it over the years, in where home run differential means a lot to the Chicago White Sox. And I'm just gotten to the point that maybe a new manager will fix things. Maybe if they stay healthy, we'll fix things. I think now at this point of the season and at this point of the contention window, the roster's flawed. The players are flawed. The front office is not good at their job. The only one that I'd be willing to see keep their job after this tremendous start is Pedro Grifol, and he just got here. But I've got serious questions about everyone else involved with this organization, and now the doubt has really seeped into my mind, and now I'm wondering, not only is it a front office problem, but I think you got a player problem here for the White Sox roster. Like, I don't believe they are going to improve because this is just the style of play that these group of individuals play baseball.
Even Grifol, like, it's tough because this is his first month as a manager at, any, not at any level, but any, major league level, like his first prominent role in a dugout. And there's nothing, he's not saying anything impressive, but I wonder, what can he say? What can he say? Like, he can light guys up and rip into them. And is that what you want? Would that be counterproductive? Would they say, like, who the hell is this guy? And tune him out the way they tuned out like Tony La Russa, or maybe didn't tune him out, but couldn't hear Tony La Russa. And they go about their business being like, 26 individuals or like 5 clicks or whatever you want to say that the clubhouse turns into. And it's the same thing as it was last year, but worse. I don't really know what Grifol can say, but it's just, if you have a year like this, like I remember when they hired Rick Renteria, they went from Robin Ventura to Rick Renteria, and they hadn't announced the rebuild plan yet. And you're thinking like, well, if Rick Renteria is taking this over, they didn't interview anybody. Like, is he the guy you want in a last ditch effort, in a low resources effort to contend again with these players? And then they traded all the players away, or at least they started to tear it down, and like the manager became less consequential. Renteria had done the job before, seemed like a positive guy, not a terrible hire, and turned out to be not a terrible hire for that point in time. But like Grifol, like if he has this year, like what's the point of continuing almost? Like, maybe he goes into a rebuild roster, but like this is just a terrible first impression. So, I mean, he's got to think a lot riding on this as somebody who, a team with, maybe not high hopes, but high leverage. Like this is a case where, you got to get the job done, or else, it's kind of like the equivalent of a blown save. If you squander this, really hard to go back out there and say like, yeah, I got ideas for this next team. Like with Renteria, he got one shot at a contender, did an okay job until the very end, and they said not good enough. But it was all the losing that happened beforehand that built up like too much scar tissue to operate past, and they just wanted a fresh start. Like Grifol, this is a lot of scar tissue early on for a manager if he's having this kind of season. So, I mean, I don't even know if Grifol, like if the White Sox somehow by any miracle overhaul their front office, like I'd say, yeah, get rid of them. Like just let the new administration hire their own guys, their own coaching staff, and do everything that way. And I would feel no attachment given the way it's starting. But yeah, I also don't want to judge a guy off the first 22 games when it's a flawed roster falling apart on them, and in a way that, is predictable. But it is a mess, and it's all identifiable. None of this is really surprising except for, I'm not even really saying except for, aside from maybe like the sequencing. I think that's probably the most surprising thing is like, they can't even, they've struggled to get like all the elements working together for even like 2 games in a row. That's, I think, what's most impressive. Like, no series wins, no consecutive wins. At this point, you'd think they would luck into that somehow, and haven't done that. So I think that's really the most surprising thing. But when you look at the individual elements, like some guys are struggling, but there were some, caution flags, if not red flags, around these players. Like nobody is really, I'm thinking about the roster, and like nobody is really, struggling out of the gate that you think like, oh, I'm shocked. Like, no, they're just kind of occupying their, 30th percentile outcomes, which were, realistic with the injuries they had, or the age they are, or the wear and tear they've suffered, or what they've done the last year plus. Like that's what I think what makes it so hard to buy into a turnaround is all these, reasons are very real.
The most popular question on White Sox Twitter or any social media platform is, what do the White Sox do at the trade deadline? Like, you already have White Sox fans looking ahead to July. Who are the White Sox moving? If you need to start rebuild 3.0, who could be leaving? My official position is this. I don't think the White Sox should do anything if Rick Hahn is still going to be the GM for the entire season. If he's still going to be the GM for the entire season, I'd rather the White Sox not do anything, because I'd rather have somebody, preferably outside the organization with fresh eyes on the entire roster, making these decisions, and not this, well, maybe I'll get a rebuild 3.0 and then I'll start moving Lance Lynn and start moving Lucas Giolito, all the contracts that could be expiring at the end of the season. I mean, that's really the easy answer, folks, because the cost is not that high for players that are going to be on expiring contracts or have really cheap buyouts like Lance Lynn and Yasmani Grandal. I think they both have Grandal's a true free agent, but Lance Lynn has a $1 million buyout. Who knows? Maybe even Liam Hendricks, if he could show that he's healthy, because he's got that contract option where if the White Sox don't pick it up for the 2024 season, he is owed $1 million for the next 15 seasons, or the White Sox pick up the club option for 2024. They pay him $15 million to be the White Sox closer next year. And who in the hell knows what kind of team that's going to be. I think that's way too far down the line. But my official position is I just don't trust Rick Hahn to do anything correct at the moment. So I would say that I don't want the White Sox to do anything, even though July seems really far away. I'm hopeful that the team could turn it around still, and we have something more positive to say, especially the months of May and June. But I also pointed out in my worst case scenario during our predictions before the season that the worst case scenario is the White Sox dig themselves such a deep hole in April they cannot climb out of it. And when July comes around, the July schedule is a lot tougher than the April schedule. And things can really unwind for the White Sox right before the trade deadline. And it can get a lot worse before it gets a lot better. So I would like to shelve those talks. But right now, my official position is as long as Rick Hahn is the GM, Jim, I would prefer the White Sox not to do anything. What are your thoughts on that particular topic with so many White Sox fans asking?
Yeah, I get that. The thing I don't like about that, and it's not like a problem with your logic, is that it runs into the Al Avila thing from the Tigers last year, where part of the reason he was fired, and not the entire reason, like he had, the track record was ultimately the reason, but one of the things that prompted it was like the trade deadline came and went and he did nothing, or like he had all those relievers to move Gregory Soto and Andrew Chafin, Robbie Grossman was one. I think he moved Grossman, but like just they had all these relievers that could potentially bring something back, and they weren't going to be contending within the next couple of years based on all the injuries they suffered from the players they considered frontline, contributors to this rebuild window they were hoping they were accelerating. And he couldn't get anything done. And kind of like Rick Hahn couldn't get anything done at the deadline, aside from Jake Diekman. And, we heard, Rick Hahn flagellate himself and say, I'm right there with you, and being frustrated. And we all rolled our eyes, and like Al Avila didn't do that. But I think like after the deadline, they realized like, oh, he just botched the deadline. And, if you're the Tigers, if that's all it took to fire him, then you really shouldn't have let him get there. So if the White Sox are like, if this is really going to be the status quo for a while, like 7-15 or 7-15 type bad, like maybe they get back onto a 70 win pace, but like there's no sign of progress and no real upward trajectory. And eventually like one of the Twins or the Guardians gets hot, and we're talking about a team that's 10 games back instead of theoretically like one series away from being tied for first place, which is how bad the Central is. Like you look at that and say, if that's happening in mid-May, just like fire him then. Like, and obviously we're talking about the White Sox here, so that seems like a pipe dream, but just like, that's how I kind of look at it, is like, you can't let that guy get to the deadline if he's botched 2 rebuilds. And this is really tanking when they had like a second year of a record-ish payroll that they've never been in. This was supposed to be hit a window, and they're falling apart. Like, fire that guy. Fire Kenny. Like, clean house before you get there. Let somebody else take over and try to get this, do what they can with the core, decide to keep the core, decide we need more time to evaluate. Over the winter one is when we're going to be pulling the trigger on some moves once I see these guys for 3 months myself and get an idea of it. That's just kind of how I look at it. I mean, I'm probably asking for the impossible here, but just when you look at what happened with the Tigers as a cautionary tale, heed that cautionary tale.
That's a good point, Jim. Let's try to pump some more positive into this conversation real quick. Eloy Jimenez had a good weekend. His first 2 at-bats on Friday were terrible. And we had the watch party, and we were ripping Eloy because he was continuing to do what he did in the Philly series, just not have a good game plan at the plate. And then suddenly he gets a home run, his first home run of the season, and his swings look so much better for the rest of the weekend. He had another home run in the series. He had a big double, so he almost had 3 home runs in this series. So Eloy finally, Jim, in the 2023 season has shown some life.
Yeah. Lifting the ball in air, like he's heating that. A lot of good contact with Pullfield, had the double off the base of the wall. Like even his best contact, like the double off the wall was not like a no doubter. When that left his bat, you're thinking like, oh, get out, and like couldn't make a play on it. Couldn't come close to making a play on it. So having that kind of carry, I think is something we saw from him in the minor leagues, that made him a top 5 prospect. when he was winning Silver Sluggers and being on that kind of, impact player pace that we talked about could hit 40 plus homers over the course of a 162 game season. Those are the kind of swings that do it. Unfortunately, and this might be getting to your negatives, but Luis Robert starts swinging at everything. Robert Jr., I should say, starts swinging at everything same time. So it's like it's almost like they're sharing a bat, and only one guy can use the good bat at once, and it decides which one do you want more. And I'd always say Robert, just because I like watching him run and get on base more. But that's kind of what we're talk about sequencing. Not being able to get two of your core players, the two healthy players from the core that we talk about never playing together. They're playing together, but they're not playing well together. And that's just another thing that's causing them to spin. But when Robert was playing well, Jimenez had nothing to offer. Now Jimenez is back. Robert is chasing everything, and round they go.
Yeah, this past week, covering the 6 games, the 3 games against the Phillies, the 3 games against the Rays, Luis Robert is 3 for 25 with 10 strikeouts this past week in action. He's not alone. Lindin Sosa, 2 for 18 with 3 Ks. Jake Berger has cooled off. He's 2 for 19 with 9 strikeouts to 3 walks. And joining Eloy Jimenez, Andrew Benintendi is 6 for 20. Elvis Andrus is showing some life, even though it's singles. He's 5 for 20. As a team, though, they're not running. They've only had 2 stolen bases this past week, and they are barely walking, 15 walks, and that also includes that one game that you mentioned where they walked 6 times in an inning, and they struck out 56 times in 7 games. So they have this terrible strikeout to walk ratio. Again, they're hitting the ball on the ground. They're not hitting the ball very hard. They don't walk. They strike out a lot. There's just a lot going wrong, and these are a lot of the same talking points we had last season and why they underachieved so much and finished 500 when they had World Series aspirations and should have repeated as American League Central Division champs after the 2021 season. And here we are, and it's getting worse. And we're hoping that it gets better, but we're not going to blow smoke up your butt. Because after a quick word from our sponsors, we're going to preview the next series for the White Sox, and it's the Toronto Blue Jays in Toronto. And again, on paper, it looks to be a uphill climb for the Chicago White Sox. Next on the Sox Machine podcast. Kick off the new year with new gear built to last. Our friends at Shady Rays have you covered from the sun to the slopes with premium polarized shades, customable snow glasses, and much more. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that offers a world-class product that's just as good as any expensive pair you've worn. Durable frames and extremely clear optics for outdoor adventures. And that's not all. Shady Rays offers the most insane protection in all of eyewear. Every pair of sunglasses is backed by lost and broken replacements. If you lose or break your pair, even on day 1, they told us they will send you a brand new pair, no questions asked. Wear your Shady Rays with confidence because they have your back long after you purchase. With Shady Rays, you can look good and feel good. To date, they have donated over 20 million meals to fight hunger with Feeding America. If you don't love them, exchange them for a new pair or return them for free within 30 days. There's no risk when you shop with Shady Rays. Their team always has your back. I actually have 3 pairs from Shady Rays because they just look awesome, and I'm very picky about my sunglasses. Sometimes I like to match my sunglasses with my outfit. I can be that way. And exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal of the new year. Go to shadyrays.com and use promo code SOXMACHINE for 50% off 2 pairs of polarized sunglasses. Again, that's shadyrays.com, promo code SOXMACHINE. Try for yourself. The shades rated 5 stars by over 200,000 people. Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast. All right, the White Sox fly from St. Petersburg, Florida, up to Toronto, Canada, and the Blue Jays not as strong as the Rays. So I guess that's good news. The Blue Jays are 13-9 for the season. They're 6 games back of Tampa Bay, and I laugh at that because the Blue Jays would be leading the American League Central with a 13-9 record, but they're in the American League East. So now they're 6 games back, and they are tied for 4th place because Baltimore is playing good baseball. The Yankees are also 13-9 to start the season. In the last 10 games, the Blue Jays are 5-5. Offensively, the Blue Jays are okay. They're not hitting on all cylinders right now. As a team OPS, it's at 732. That's 13th in Major League Baseball. Against right-handed pitching, again, they're going to see a lot of right-handed pitching from the White Sox. As a team, they're better against righties. They are hitting 737. That is 11th in Major League Baseball. Compared to the White Sox offense, a 692 OPS. That's 20th in baseball. Shockingly, against right-handed pitching, the White Sox team OPS is 691. So right there with the team OPS when you include the lefties, and that makes the White Sox 21st in baseball. On the pitching side, a little bit of a struggle for the Blue Jays. They have a staff ERA of 4.48. That's 19th in Major League Baseball. The starters, 4.55 ERA. That's 18th. Bullpen is a little better at 4.35 ERA, but that's 20th in Major League Baseball. The White Sox, you already know. I'm not even going to bother reading the numbers because they are very depressing and they are much worse than where the Blue Jays are on the pitching side. So offensively and on the pitching side, the Blue Jays do have an advantage, but it's not as one-sided as it was when the White Sox played the Tampa Bay Rays this past weekend. Your pitching probables for this series, Monday night at 6:07 p.m. Central Time. It's Lance Lynn against old friend Chris Bassett. Tuesday night, 6:07 p.m. Central Time. This is going to be another watch party on playback.tv/Sox Machine, as our friends from the 108 will be joining us as we'll watch this game together. Mike Clevenger will make the start for the White Sox against Jose Barrios. And on Wednesday afternoon, getaway day, this is a 12:07 p.m. Central Time start. It's Michael Kopech against UC Kikuchi, who has been pitching really well for the Blue Jays after leaving the Seattle Mariners. All right, Jim, so breaking it down as far as the series and all the numbers and the data, again, it appears that the Blue Jays should be the heavy favorites. Let's start off with the simple question. Unlike St. Petersburg, will the White Sox win a game in Toronto?
God, that's so depressing.
Great answer.
Yeah, I want to say yes, just because, like, when you look at something like Jose Barrios, I think it's been fascinating watching him because he's been my, kind of like the, not role model, but like just my example for talking about like Lucas Giolito, the kind of extension he wants. Do you give it to him? And like the way, Barrios has pitched since being traded to the Blue Jays and how he's, fared on that, 6 years, $130 million extension, something in that range.
Right.
Has not gone well. Does not look like money well spent. No real progress over a couple of years and trying to like right him. So like that game they've gotten to Barrios before. That one feels good. I mean, Kikuchi's been iffy. Chris Bassett, like, he loves sticking it to the White Sox. Like he's somebody who, whether he actually takes it personally or whether he just, does the Jordan thing where he uses the trade to rile himself up to pitch well against them. Like when he's been healthy and in this recent form, like 2019, 2020 especially, like he just shoved it against the White Sox and just the right-handed sweepers, basically we call them now, and running fastballs in, sliders away, just no chance. So if that guy reappears and not the one who's been mediocre this year, like that's gonna be a tough assignment. But there is, like when you just look at the way they've pitched, the White Sox should be able to get them. Similar like to the way they got to the Rays, like the Rays invited them into the game, but they took advantage. They scored, plenty enough to win. So it feels like there should be one game in here where the bats awaken. It's just a matter to me of like that, Blue Jays offense is dangerous and Rogers Center is even easier to hit in than before because they changed the fences there. So that's something I'm curious to watch, like see how that plays out when watching fly balls go to the outfield. Cause I haven't watched a whole lot of Blue Jays this year. Haven't really seen any games in Rogers Center. So I'm curious when, like how the fly balls to left field at Camden Yards always shocked me when saying like, oh, that one has a chance. And then all of a sudden there's a cave in left field that, you need to, hit the ball 35 feet longer to clear a higher fence and realizing like, oh, that's dead out there. I'm just hoping that when we're watching it, it's because like Gavin Sheets hit one of his 99-mile-per-hour fly balls that just carries and carries and carries versus watching, Vlad Guerrero Jr. or Dalton Varsho or something like that, like hit a similar fly ball that all of a sudden puts the White Sox in a 4-0 hole.
Yeah, looking at the success rates, especially the first game, Matt Chapman is batting 118 against Lance Lynn, and that's 17 at bats, but Matt Chapman has hit 2 solo home runs. So I bring this up because Matt Chapman is on fire to start the year for the Toronto Blue Jays. His OPS in the season is over 1,000. He's hitting 367, 438 on base percentage, and slugging 684. He's got 5 home runs, 17 RBIs. He's got 10 doubles. We know how good he is defensively, especially at third base. He's having a great start to this season. Vlad Guerrero Jr. is Vlad Jr. He's got an OPS over 900. Bo Bichette's got an OPS over 800. But then it starts to get really quiet for the Toronto Blue Jays. Even George Springer's off to a pretty slow start. So in that first game, I'm curious on how Lance Lynn does because he's been digging the White Sox a hole early. And then he gets on track. And then all of a sudden he's in the 6th inning of that game. And he's racking up 7 or more strikeouts. He needs to have a good start. He needs to have a clean start. I'm worried about how the top of the lineup for the Blue Jays hits Lance Lynn. You mentioned Jose Barrios. Man, the White Sox do have a great track record against Barrios. Andrews, Benintendi, Berger, Jimenez, Vaughn all have batting averages over 300 against Jose Barrios. Benintendi, Jimenez, Robert Jr., Sheets, and Vaughn have all hit home runs against Barrios. So I think I'm with you. If there's any game that the White Sox do win, if they could really put a hurt on the Toronto Blue Jays, is that second game against Jose Barrios. They do not have a good track record against Kikuchi. And Kikuchi coming in 3-0 with a 3.80 ERA with 20 strikeouts. He has been pitching well for the Blue Jays. Even though he's a lefty, I'm a little worried about how the White Sox fare against him. The Blue Jays have had a good track record against Michael Kopech, so I'm a little bit worried about that game. So my thinking is the White Sox do win a game. I'm with you. They win our watch party on playback on Tuesday, but they lose the other 2. And even though it kind of pains me to say this out loud when we have the midweek podcast on Sox Machine Live, even though it'd be terrible to say the White Sox would be 8-17 the next time we chat, Jim, that's just where my gut is coming into this series. Like, we're going to be talking about an 8-17 White Sox team after 25 games.
I thought you were going to say, it pains me to say this, but I would take that outcome. I would take, winning 1 out of 3 and that's really depressing. Because they have to start winning a series at some point eventually. So, yeah, that's kind of, they have to start winning series eventually. They have to, math says they have to. And just for the sake of TV ratings and clubhouse Discord and so forth, they have to start doing something. And so sometimes it can be tough. Sometimes the schedule isn't going to allow it, but there is an opening here because, as you mentioned, the Blue Jays lineup is a little bit top heavy. There are some ways to pitch around it. Their rotation has a weak spot. The Pablo Lopez just got beat up by the Nets. You can always get somebody on their off day, and the White Sox may as well make an off day, but hard to project it. Given the failures we've seen and especially the Lopez blown save and how efficient he was in blowing that save, single homer, all of a sudden it's over, no outs even recorded, no tease as to he can get out of this. He didn't even get into it before the game was over. That's, what's so maddening about this. And so disheartening and hard to generate faith in a tough looking series working on the White Sox favor. But if it's gonna, it's gonna, that's kind of how I have to look at it. But they have to prove it, and they haven't done that yet. So I'm hoping they can win one, but I want to see him win one. I want to see him win one, and hopefully it's not the third game of the series to where we're talking about 0-7-1 in series to start the season, going winless and 8 straight series start a season. That's terrible.
And then having a 4-game series against Tampa Bay, which you would take a series split. So you could start the season all of April winless in season series. And then you could roll into May and you have that 3-game home series against the Minnesota Twins that ends the 7-game homestand. starting with Tampa Bay, it ends with Minnesota. Maybe their first series win of the season is in Cincinnati when we're there for the meetup. Maybe then, Jim, they will have a series win and we could all be there to celebrate the victorious occasion. Man, that is dour. That is dour.
And they'll still be like 5 games out of the Central.
Right?
Like, no, that's my fear, is like they're just going to keep stringing it along. Like, looking at the standings, Boston is last place at 12-11. They'd be a half game out of the Central.
Yep. Yeah, every team in the American League East is above 500 right now. And I just quickly looked it up. The worst start for first 25 games is Hawk Harrelson's 1986 White Sox team, 7-18. The 2018 White Sox started the year 8-17. So the White Sox get swept here by the Blue Jays. This would be the worst 25-game start to a season since when Hawk Harrelson was the general manager. And boy, that is company you do not want to be involved with for any front office, especially the major league.
Yeah.
So that's what the White Sox are looking at. And again, we'll be recapping as far as the games with the White Sox wake-up calls daily. And we'll have Sox Machine Live to recap the White Sox and Blue Jays series midweek.
Yeah, we just need like somebody to tell Jerry Reinsdorf, if it gets to that point, that Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams have just tied Hawk Harrelson, the GM, for worst start. Like, because Jerry admits Hawk was a mistake as a GM. Like, would that like break through the force field that keeps these guys employed and say like, oh, they're Hawk bad. I remember that. I still cite that. That's a very vivid memory of something gone terribly wrong. Would that, probably not, but still, I hope, because, as we talked about, like, if this team is going to be a 70-win team, and this is the kind of pace they're starting on, like, and they have to tear it down, like, you do not want anybody involved in the front office, whether it's Kenny Williams, Rick Hahn, Chris Getz, anybody, to be involved in tearing this down, because they've shown no ability to build back up and see it through.
Well, we'll see on how this series goes. And again, we'll talk to you guys midweek for Sox Machine Live. But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. I know things are bad. I know that they are. And a lot of you do not want to watch White Sox baseball. That's fine. We'll watch the White Sox baseball games for you and report back. So continue to follow us on social media. We're at Sox Machine. I'm at Sox Machine _Josh. Continuing to visit SoxMachine.com and be part of the conversation, the comment section, and all the posts that we have. And we have the Future Sox guys as well reporting what's happening down in the minor leagues. If you want to start looking at prospects again, like we did in 2016 and 2017 and 2018 days, you could definitely do that on the website. You can also follow us on Instagram, where you can see some of our curling photos and videos as well, at Sox Machine and at Sox Machine _Josh on Instagram. If this is the first time you've listened to a Sox Machine podcast, welcome. You can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.
Why?
Such as Spotify and Apple Music. And we also post the podcast episodes into our YouTube channel, which you can watch at youtube.com/Sox Machine, which is also where we have our live stream and other highlights. If you enjoy our work and want more, like we talked about at the beginning part of the show, you can sign up to become one of our Patreon supporters at patreon.com/Sox Machine. If you don't want to be part of the Veterans Committee, we still have other tiers of support, as our Patreon members get exclusive content, as Jim just recently had a P.O. Sox mailbag that he answered questions from the Patreon supporters, and you can read that. There's also ad-free versions of the podcast and website, and when we have new Sox Machine swag in the Sox Machine store, we're the first ones to receive it. Monthly plans start at $2, or you can save with an annual subscription. Again, sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball, and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.